Good morning, everyone. My name is Nelda Biescas. I am a member of the Justice Ministry team here at RMCC, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this wonderful event, our Voting 411. On behalf of the Justice Ministry team, I would like to welcome you to this event, those of you that are online and those of you that are present. Before we get started, I want to first thank everyone who participated in making this event possible, regardless how small or large your portion was. It was meaningful and needed. I'd like to take this moment first to open up our event in prayer. If you'd please join me and bow your heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this lovely day. Thank you for the words that you've given us, the resources that you've given us, the opportunities that you've given us to make a difference in knowing that you guide us every single day to be just in all that we do, to do what we do well every day with as many people as we can, as much as we can. In your name we pray, amen. I'd like to just give you a little bit of information about the format that we're going to take. We've got two portions of this event. The first one will be given by Bob Stubblefield. He'll be following me shortly. He is one of the members of our Justice Ministry team. And that will be followed by the Harris County Elections Administration. There will be a break in between so that you can take care of personal needs. However, feel free to do that whenever necessary. I do want to let you know that the format also will be, we will talk about who we are, why it's important to vote, and how you will vote. At this time, I would like to introduce Bob Stubblefield. Bob.
Thank you, Nelda. Wonderful prayer. Bradley, you want to advance some screens for me? Go to Resurrection's Mission. I'm Bob Stubblefield here with the Justice Ministry today, and I'm so happy to see so many smiling faces. I'd like to start out with Resurrection's mission. It's to demonstrate God's unconditional love to all people through Christ-like action. Resurrection MCC is open to everyone. We share the love of God with all people, just as they are. We experience a relevant spirituality that is both positive and practical, filled with liberating hope and unconditional love. Slide. We are an inclusive and diverse congregation. We welcome people of all races, cultures, spiritual backgrounds, sexual orientations, and gender identities. Because our faith is rooted in the ministry and teachings of Jesus, we respect those who connect with God through other spiritual paths. And through Christ-like action, we seek to love God, love our neighbor, by doing justice, practicing kindness, and walking humbly with God. The election administration folks will be going over the dates for the important dates for the election. The last day to register to vote is October 11th. October 24th is when early voting begins. October 28th is the last day to apply to vote by mail. November 4th is when early voting ends. And November 8th is when the election occurs. Thank you. Okay, what's on the ballot? Almost every office across Texas is on the ballot this year, plus some bond initiatives. So we want to make sure that during this midterm election you get out and vote, because only about 22% of the eligible voters vote in midterm elections, as opposed to 40 to 60% with the presidential election. So we'll start off with the bond proposition. The Houston bond referendum is $478 million, and this is a Houston bond referendum. Proposition A is for public safety, $277 million. Proposition B, parks, for $50 million. Proposition C, animal care, BARC, $47 million. Proposition D, public health, is $33 million. Proposition E, general permanent improvements, 29 million. Proposition F, library for 26 million. And Proposition G, solid waste for 6 million. And voters can vote on these, each item individually. So if you don't agree with one of those, you can vote no. But this is the first time that, since 2017, catch my breath, that Houston has had a bond referendum on the ballot. Thank you. Harris County also has a county bond propositions for $1.2 billion. Proposition A, as you can see up there, for public safety and technology for $100 million. Proposition B, roads, drainage, and transportation projects for $900 million. And Proposition C, parks and trails for $200 million. Okay, I'm going to run through these pretty quick. When I initially did this, the ballots weren't out yet. And the election administration people will tell you how you can look at for your specific ballot initiatives. But the U.S. House of Representatives, since we redrew the maps and the district lines after the census, all the U.S. House representatives are up for election. And Texas has a new 38-district congressional map that incorporates 2 new House seats, which the state gained due to the population growth. And the representatives serve 2-year terms, so they'll be up for election. As you can see, my candidate is Sheila Jackson Lee, is my House representative. The governor's office is up, and he's the chief executive, and Beto O'Rourke is up against Greg Abbott. Abbott is seeking his 3rd term, and O'Rourke came within 3 percentage points of beating Ted Cruz. The Attorney General is up for election. He's the top lawyer in Texas, and it's Ken Paxton. He's seeking his 3rd term, and his tenure has been clouded by high-profile securities fraud indictment and an FBI investigation that claims malfeasance while in office. Lieutenant Governor, the 2nd highest executive in the state, and he presides over the Texas Senate. And Dan Patrick is seeking his 3rd term. Mike Collier, a Democratic nominee, is challenging him this year. Commissioner of Agriculture, the Ag Department supports farmers, administers school lunch programs. And Sid Miller and Susan Hayes are the candidates in that election. The Commissioner of General Land Office. The Land Commissioner oversees an agency that manages 13 million acres of state land, administers disaster recovery funds, and contributes to the public school funding, and has administrative control of the Alamo. The Comptroller of Public Accounts is the state official for collecting taxes, overseeing the state treasury, and forecasting the amount of money that's available to legislatures when they craft the state's 2-year budget. The Railroad Commissioner, he regulates the oil and gas industry, and the members of a 3-person board are elected statewide, and 1 seat is up for election this year. Texas Supreme Court is the state's highest civil court and has 9 justices. 3 of the 9 on the Supreme Court are up for election this year. And the justices are elected statewide, and Republicans currently hold all seats. Texas Court of Appeals. The Texas Court of Appeals is the state's highest criminal court. The 9 members are elected statewide, and they're currently all Republicans. State Board of Education, there are 15 districts within the state board, and each seat is up for election because the districts were redrawn this year. And currently, 9 are held by Republicans, and 6 are held by Democrats. The Texas Senate, and every seat of the Texas Senate is up for re-election this year because the district lines were redrawn. Almost all the candidates preferred by Dan Patrick nabbed enough votes to make it to the November general election, and 25 of the candidates on the ballot are incumbents running for re-election. And finally, there are a lot of district races that are going to be up and school board races that are particular to where you live, and the election administrator folks can give you the website that you need to go to. The Texas House, and there are 150 members of the House, and each state represents a 2-year term. And this year, the election takes place under a new map, as I told you earlier, that has been redrawn. And almost all candidates preferred by Speaker Dade Phelan nabbed enough votes to make it to the November general election. Are there any questions? Let me take a breath.
Hi, I have a question. I heard you mention that only 22% of people vote in the midterm elections. What does that mean? Why is that important?
Well, that's important because we're basically every state office is up for re-election this year. And whoever gets voted in this year will And whoever gets voted in this year, they will, and whoever's elected this year, they'll set the agenda for the next 2 years. So it's very important to get out and vote. So every vote.
I'm sorry, is there any way that I can retain this that was in writing? Can I get that? Is there a hard copy here? Or?
Yes, there's going to be a copy made available on the YouTube website for Resurrection. It's going to be accompanying this video. The slides will, so.
I just wanted to add to that is that the League of Women Voters is an excellent resource for nonpartisan information about who's in the race and about the resolutions. So it's League of Women Voters.
Thank you, Verge. So every vote on every issue, on every level, from every person counts. And I like to always bring in Micah, the prophet, chapter 6, verse 8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with our God? And what we're going to get into now are really the social issues that I think are important in this upcoming election. And as Christians, these are things that we really work with. And at Resurrection, we trust the breadth of God's creation as a model for embracing God's creation, creatures, and children. We are connected by being anti-racist, and we're an LGBTQIA affirming community that puts love into action. And as Jesus' people, we follow the way to co-create God's kingdom now, celebrating our freedom as healed people, oppressed, abolished, and creation restored. As people of faith, we believe elections are a referendum on the values that will shape our future. And how can we renew our fragile democracy? How do we honor the human dignity of every person? How do we protect God's creation, our sacred earth, and our children's future? What policies will prioritize the common good and confront issues that remind us of our interdependence? How has faith inspired me? Well, I came back to Resurrection after a 14-year hiatus, and it really wasn't to come to a worship service, it was to come register voters. It was the last Sunday in 2018 that I was able to register voters. And I looked on Resurrection's website and saw that Reverend Vicki Gibbs, was now an associate pastor. And that when I'd left Resurrection, she was just an administrative assistant. So that really inspired me to come back. But not only to come back for worship service, to go to Wednesday night classes, and she really taught me about racial justice and about doing justice. And really that transformed my life. She showed me the things you can do and should do in faith, and that I needed to take action. And I needed to be able to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves or couldn't because for various reasons. Okay, so where does that leave me now? I believe that more unites us than divides us, so I'm working for our shared values. I believe climate change is a moral issue, so I'm working for a sustainable future. I believe that all people have the right to live in safety, so I'm working for migration justice. I believe faith belongs in the public square, so I'm working for justice, freedom, and peace. I believe love is love, so I'm working to end discrimination. And I believe every person is a beloved child of God, so I'm working for the healthy moms and children. And I hope this presentation will not only allow you to navigate the urgent moral questions raised by the election, but also educate you on the voting process and ensure your vote is counted. Back up a slide. So protecting God's creation in our sacred earth, protecting God's creation and our sacred earth. And it's creating a better world for our children and our futures. And as people of faith and conscience, our values call us to be good stewards of creation. Climate change is destroying our common home and harming our communities, especially the most vulnerable, and putting future generations at risk. From historic wildfires that we've seen in California, to the extreme weather, to air pollution, climate change is devastating our health and destroying our environment. And it's doing that regardless of zip code or political affiliation. We know that the fossil fuel industry has polluted our air and water, endangered our environment, and jeopardized our children's future for too long. 2 out of every 3 Americans are worried about global warming. American voters, including voters of faith, overwhelmingly support policies to protect our communities. And our elected officials have a moral responsibility to take care of the earth and respond to the climate crisis. And we still have time to avert its worst impacts if we act now. And I could put on there our Texas grid, which really needs attention and is really not getting attention from our current governor. Building an economy of inclusion. In our economy, systems should work for all Americans, not just the wealthiest few. It's a matter of justice and it's a matter of human dignity. Our religious traditions recognize the importance of caring for the most vulnerable through charity, but helping our neighbors in poverty also compels us to address the root causes. And St. Augustine wrote centuries ago, charity is no substitute for justice withheld. In order to build a just economy that encompasses all people to flourish, political leaders must promote policies that honor the dignity of work through fair compensation and paid time off for family, easing inflation, protecting the social safety nets for the common good. And the teachings of the diverse faith makes clear that unjust treatment of workers and extreme inequalities are signs of a sinful society. The Hebrew prophets denounced greed and the hoarding of wealth. And our political leaders should invest in the future that we vote for, one of a safer climate, an economy where everyone can earn a good living and have a good life, and modern, clean energy infrastructure that improves the lives of all people. Loving our immigrant neighbor. We know how the current governor feels about our immigrant neighbor and those seeking asylum. He spent over $12 million busing migrants, most of them asylum seekers, to East Coast cities, the more liberal cities. So our holy texts repeatedly make clear that immigrants must be treated with dignity. And for example, there's a strong admonishment to provide hospitality to strangers and foreigners, and it appears 36 times in the Torah. The word justice appears over 400 times in the Old Testament. And I'll throw out a few Bible verses. Hebrews 13, 1 through 2. It's all believers, it's keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. 1 Peter, show hospitalities to one another without grumbling. Romans 12:13, contribute to the needs of the saints and to show them hospitality. And in Leviticus, you shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. So really all we have to do is live by the golden rule. Pope Francis reminded us in an address to Congress that the rule points us in a clear direction. Let us treat others with the same passion and compassion with which we want to be treated. Let us seek for others the same possibilities which we seek for ourselves. And let us help others to grow as we ourselves have been helped. And our nation is stronger because of immigrants and refugees. And so we asked our question to ourselves: how will we honor our immigrant neighbor and families through our vote? There hasn't been any, hey Susan, there hasn't been any substantive immigration policies since the Reagan administration in 1980. And a couple of slides back, I talked about building an economy of inclusion. Texas still has let me look so I'll make sure. Texans, I'm trying to look for the minimum wage. Texas, $7.25 an hour. So the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. And that has been from 2009. So there hasn't been an increase in all those years. So we see a pattern there. Almost 40 years of waiting to overhaul our immigration system, and we haven't increased the minimum wage since 2009. And it's the inability of our legislatures to work together to solve the important issues impacting our communities. We can give tax cuts to the richest, but we can't get a bill passed to provide a living wage. Any questions? I need to take a breath. I'm fine, I just needed to take a breath. You can advance the slide, Bradley. Thank you. Human rights. They're rights that we have merely because we exist as human beings. And they're inherent to all people, regardless of nationality, sex, or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. And the UN Assembly of Human Rights, under the UN General Assembly, adopted in 1948, establishes a modern framework for linking public policy and law to the theological and moral tenets shared across the world, religions. Generally, Americans have the freedom to worship, criticize the government, and trade, etc. And because of these freedoms, we tend to associate human rights violations with like political prisoners who live outside the U.S. borders. And our privilege and misconception often prevents us from seeing the injustice of everyday human rights violations in the United States. Statistics demonstrate that human rights violations occur in the U.S. every day. We have 34 million Americans who don't have enough to eat, and that includes 700,000 in Harris County. 600,000 Americans are homeless. 30 million Americans have no health insurance. 2 million Americans are in prison, and the United States has the highest child poverty rate in the industrialized world. Advance. Healthcare is a human right. Texas has both the highest number, 5.4 million, and the highest percentage, 18.4%, of uninsured residents in the nation, including 1 million children. At least 350,000 children are eligible but not enrolled in Medicaid or CHIP. And Texas has chosen not to expand Medicaid, under which approximately 954,000 people, adults, would qualify. And when we talk about the incarcerated, Texas leads the nation with 136,000 people incarcerated in 2020. And the United States leads the world in total number of people incarcerated, with more than 2 million prisoners nationwide. And this number is equivalent to about 25% of the world's total prison population, the highest rate in the world. And overall, the incarceration rate in the U.S. has skyrocketed. The prison population was a mere 200,000 in 1972. And it's 2 million Americans are in prison today. Reproductive rights are human rights. In the U.S. Supreme Court, actually, I'd like to get Verge up here to speak about this. Would you mind? This is Verge Parks.
It's kind of my wheelhouse.
This is kind of her wheelhouse.
Thank you, Bob, by the way. I mean, because I am a big advocate for, when we talk about this issue in public, it really should be people who kind of have the parts, a uterus and an ovary. That said, there are a lot of people who don't identify as women, and sometimes they're even political candidates that we like, who repeatedly state that it is a women's issue, and of course it is. 99% of people who seek reproductive care are cisgendered women. However, we talk and have learned a lot about microaggressions in this church. It's one of the things I love about this church. And it's important to remember that there are also people who do not identify as female, who are affected by these restrictions. And it's difficult enough for a transgender man to go into a gynecological clinic, but even more difficult when it has the word women attached to it. So just keep that in mind. So people, that are affected by this, it really affects every part of their life. And most of you know I used to work for a clinic here in Houston. And I know after Harvey, for example, Hurricane Harvey, we had a lot of patients that were coming in because they had just lost everything they own. And so we never know what is the motivation and what is the reason for somebody to seek that kind of specific care. And a big part of me thinks that as long as it's the patient's decision, and that they can come in, as long as it's the patient's decision and nobody is forcing them, then it doesn't really, to me, it doesn't matter what their reason is. Their reason's a good reason. And I do see it as a healthcare right that is being severely restricted by people who see their moral position as opposing it. One of the things that I really, really loved about my job was when I had the opportunity to remind fellow Christians, patients, that God loves them unconditionally, and that's never, ever, ever going to change. Because on their way into the clinic, they probably had somebody shouting horrible, horrible, mean things to them in the name of God and in the name of Christ. And so I trust that people listening to this actually have, if you're going to listen to this, you probably pay attention to the news, so you know about the ruling that essentially overturned Roe versus Wade. And so it, as much as we would love to think that by electing new representation, that's going to suddenly change everything, and all the clinics will reopen in Texas. The reality is that isn't going to happen because it's been a precarious state for years, and once people have sold their property in Texas and relocated to New Mexico or Colorado or some other state, then it's unlikely that they're going to come back here to rebuild. So it will continue to be difficult, but there will be ways that each of us can contribute to providing the care that these patients need. And so I encourage you to seek them out. And there are organizations that are working actively to help patients from Texas get to other states so they can have their needs met. And so I think it would be awesome if we also have leadership that really encourages people to seek pregnancy prevention, and preventing getting pregnant another time. I wish that we had more programs that would truly, truly support working families and children. Bob gave us some statistics about the number of children that could qualify for CHIP, but there's not funding simply for outreach, for sufficient outreach so that patients know. There's two different kinds of Medicaid that affect reproductive health. One of them is the pregnancy Medicaid, and which is really, really easy to qualify for, even if somebody has a job, even if they have insurance. But that is not promoted. And there's also Texas Healthy Women, which will pay for pregnancy prevention means. So share that information because there are ways to prevent this from ever happening. Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. You let me catch my breath. Okay. We're looking at protecting the dignity of LGBTQ people. And it's a moral imperative that all human rights are respected, as I said earlier, including our LGBTQ family members, ourselves, our neighbors, and our coworkers. They also deserve the right to live without fear or discrimination for being who they are. And elected officials have all the power to shape policies. They should shape policies that ensure people are protected from all forms of discrimination. Our representatives should also consistently speak out against those who use hateful rhetoric to demean the dignity of LGBTQ people. Texas State House Speaker Dan Phelan recently affirmed his support for HB 25, and that's a law under his leadership that targets transgender students, student athletes, and saying that the state should intervene when it comes to LGBTQ children. And also, Dan Patrick said on a recent conservative radio station, said he was especially proud of the law, which was passed in a litany of anti-trans legislation introduced last year. There were double-digit legislative bills brought up. They didn't pass. This one bill did. Also, Ted Cruz has said that he will vote against a bill to codify same-sex marriage protections into federal law, insisting that the bill would be an attack on religious liberties. And I don't know whose religious liberties he's talking about. He's certainly not talking about my religious liberties. So, with respect to national polling, it shows the majority of religious groups affirm LGBTQ equality, commanding majorities of Catholics of color, 87%, Jewish Americans, 85%, white mainstream Protestants, 82%, and white Catholics, 80%, black Protestants, 78%, and even Muslims, 75%. They all support non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ persons. And even 6 in 10 white evangelical Protestants support non-discrimination measures. Pursuing restorative and racial justice. All Texans should have a chance to compete and succeed in life, but historic policies have created barriers for people based upon their race or ethnicity. These barriers lead to persistent gaps in opportunities and outcomes over time. Current policies often perpetuate these barriers. If we are to achieve our vision of expanding opportunity for all Texans, we must directly confront the policies, practices, and systems that create differential outcomes by race and ethnicity, and ensure that the public policies advance racial equality. Protecting our democratic and voting rights. This election is more than a choice between parties and ideology. It's even a more fundamental question in the state. How do we preserve democracy in the face of serious threats to fair elections and our fundamental right to vote? And Texas has some of the most restrictive voting laws in the nation, and it's all predicated on the false claim that the last presidential election was stolen and that there was massive voter fraud. And this is proven time and time again to be false. Because as Christians, we believe in racial justice and non-discrimination. We're committed to ensuring African Americans, immigrants, and other minority communities have equal access to voting. We must stop or overcome the targeting of minority communities with voter ID laws, intimidation, purging voter rolls, and other tactics. And all people are created equal, and this extends to voting rights. We want to create a more peaceful world, and we're all in this together. And what does it mean to love our neighbors as ourselves? And what does it mean to be a globalized world? The health and future of our country and communities are interconnected to the health and security of other nations. And our fates are bound up in what Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. called an inescapable network of mutuality. So Americans have to understand, they have an understandable fear about violence at home and around the world, but many leaders have stoked fears in ways that lead to two misplaced priorities: disproportionate funding for the U.S. military, and now accounts for nearly half of the world's total military spending. And here in Texas, it's easier for an 18-year-old cannot buy beer in a store, but they can buy an assault weapon. So it's easier to buy an assault weapon than a beer from your 7-Eleven. Okay, in conclusion, and before I hand this over, it's about 40 days, actually I think it's 38 days to the election. But in the Bible, a span of 40 days means something significant is happening. When God flooded the earth in Genesis, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. When the Israelis spy on the land of Canaan, they do that for 40 days. And later, when they grumble against God, they're forced to wander 40 years before they enter the promised land. And before Jesus began his public ministry, the devil tempted him for 40 days in the desert. So with the midterms just about 40 days away, we're about to confront our own sets of temptation, or even apathy, especially when we remember what we're up against. So what concrete steps can we take that can empower us and inspire every voter to vote this November? You can help register voters. We have till, I don't remember the date, the election folks will tell you, but we have about a week, the 11th, I believe. I think it's the 11th. The end of registration. You can help voters attain a valid ID, pray and connect to other faith activities, ensuring access to the vote, help people with physical challenges access the polls or to mail their ballots, and share your story of why you vote. And I was a stranger, and you didn't let me read that, Bradley. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. So welcome your neighbor, welcome the stranger, welcome the voter, welcome your neighbor to go vote, welcome everyone that you can to get them to the polls. Because here in Texas, we have an abysmal record for voting in midterm elections. And this is probably one of the most important elections that we've had in a generation. So please get your neighbors out to vote, learn what's on the ballot, and vote smart. And we're going to take a 5-minute break before the election administration folks will come up here.
I wanted to add, also have those awkward conversations with friends and family and neighbors, and ask them, so what is your plan to vote? Have you made it? Would you like to? I can drive you to the early vote location. And there's a lot of confusion about recent legislative changes regarding what we can, should I come up there? Anyway, regarding what we can and cannot do. And so, no, you cannot fill up a 16-passenger van. Well, actually, you can still. You could fill up a 16-passenger van and go through your neighborhood and take that many people to the polling location. It's just that when you do that, you're going to have to fill out a form that says, yeah, I brought these people, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, Joe Brown, etc. And,
You can carry water.
yeah, you
You
can.
you can pass out
Yes.
water in the lot.
Exactly. So you can carpool and go to church. I mean, go to vote after church service. You just can't. It's restricted. Like the church can't necessarily fill up a bus and take it to the polling
Okay,
location.
Verge,
You know?
somebody needs to take a break.
So anyway, so talk to people and talk to your neighbors and help your neighbors, and you can help your neighbor fill out a voter registration. I mean, a voting ballot, a mail ballot application. So there's not. It's just that there are restrictions to doing this as an organization, but as an individual, help your neighbor.
whenever you're ready, Bradley. Thank you, Bob, and welcome back, participants online and those of you that are here. I'd like to introduce you to Lynn and Bria. They will be taking us through the last portion of our event, and they're coming to us from the Harris County Elections Administration. Welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nelda. Thank you for the lovely welcome, and thank you guys for having us here this morning. So as she said, we are from the Harris County Elections Administrator's Office, and we're with the Outreach Division specifically, so we like to visit every community we possibly can, every church group, every civic club, so that we can make sure we're bringing people the resources that they need to make informed decisions in the voting process. So I hope you're all ready to get set and vote. So the first thing I wanted to point out here is our website at harrisvotes.com. You can check a lot of things, and it was actually just recently revamped to make it more accessible, easier to use, and a lot prettier too. So on harrisvotes.com, you can check your registration status, find your nearest polling location, which are already posted for both early voting and election day. You can view and print your sample ballot, track your mail ballot if you sent one of those in, or you're looking for your application. You can view our calendar of events and opportunities to volunteer. So something I really wanted to kind of expand on right here before we get into our agenda is the sample ballot. It's actually pretty long. If you all voted in the primary, I highly suggest you all checking that out on harrisvotes.com. You'll type in your address and it'll pull up where you're registered to vote at. Type that in, and it'll pull your sample ballot for you. Now, you can take sheets of paper into the ballot booth with you, but you cannot use your phone. So that is why we're telling everybody to get your sample ballot, make some notes, or even print out a copy, and you can make your selections to take into the booth with you. So next is just our agenda. We'll talk about status checks, the ballot, important dates, how to avoid delays with your mail ballots, the polling places, and the process for voting in person. So we just recently completed our logic and accuracy testing. It is required by Texas Election Code. We actually had all of our election staff voting on ballots over and over again. It's a series of tests to ensure that the machines and the ballots function properly for the upcoming election. So we did that a couple thousand times just to make sure we got it all ironed out perfectly. And once the ballot is built, the election staff, we tested all possible combinations of the ballot to ensure that there's no issues with the text, the programming, or the equipment. So we were actually voting on the duos. We had controllers, duos, and scans set up a lot of them, hundreds of them, if you could see here in this photo. Doesn't capture everybody, but we were doing that for 2 days, actually, to make sure that we tested every single combination, and everything came out perfect. And until we completed that, the ballot was not able to be put onto Harris Votes yet. So that's why the sample ballot was pretty recently released, because we had to complete all of this testing first. And it was a lot of fun too. I got to see a lot of folks I haven't seen in a while and have some time for community building. So right now, what we're working on is training our election workers. We need hundreds of them because Harris County is the largest county in Texas. And so we've already started our training. A lot of our election staff takes it as well, just to make sure we have, all of the granular knowledge that the judges have as well. Because, sometimes they're experiencing issues at the polling location, and our election staff has to help walk them through things or send them things that they request through the phone calls when they call our call center. So right now, only 2 out of the 782 locations that we have for Election Day need confirmation. So I think we're in a good place at this current moment to say that we pretty much got all these things ironed out. So we're just looking for 2 out of the 782. And we're currently sending out the overseas and military ballots and building out the supply cabinets that go to each polling location. Everything that is used in our elections gets quality checked 3 times. So we build the booths over and over, break them down, put them back. We test all the equipment. We ready pull it to make sure it's ready to get sent out. And all the supply cabinets, all of the sheets of paper that our judges need, all of the office supplies to make their polling location functional and safe. We make sure we check that as much as we possibly can before it all gets sent out to all of the polling locations. And so here we go, the ballot. It is the longest in the state, if you can imagine, obviously, because we are the most populous county in the state. It is 2 pages long. Again, if you voted in the primary, you know we had 2 long sheets of paper, the thermal paper that goes into the duo and will print a copy of your ballot. And your ballot is based on where you live, where you're registered to vote. So in addition to the statewide races we've been hearing about, you might also see things like, for your municipality and school boards, which are also super important. We want to make sure we do our research because, again, the ballot is very long. And to make it a short process for you, or as short as possible, please look at your sample ballot. Please make those notes, because otherwise it's going to take you quite a bit to get through it, because there's 121 screens on the voting machine itself that you have to get through. So please do your research and take your sample ballot, which you can find on harrisvotes.com, and they were just released on after September 24th, so that you can see all of the contests and the candidates at your voter registration address. Next, at the polls. So when we are voting with multi-paged ballots like we did back in February and on March 1st, we're going to feed 1 page at a time. And we got to be patient, because these are machines, right? So please be nice to them. Don't hit them. Don't rush it. Don't force it. Exactly. We want to make sure we're using 2 hands when we're guiding the paper into the machine, because otherwise it could go in at an angle, which will then cause a jam, which will then prompt you to have to call an election worker over. But don't worry, because all of our election staff is trained very thoroughly. All of our judges and clerks and alternate judges, they're all trained very thoroughly, and they have a wonderful manual in case anything happens, and they can always give our elections office a call if they're experiencing issues at the polls. So if something happens with your voting machine, if the screen is giving you an error, or if you got a paper jam, please call an election worker over. They are more than happy to help you, because the ballot's long. We want to make sure we're doing everything properly so we could get out of there in a timely manner. And practice, which you're all going to get the opportunity to do if you're here in person with us. You'll be able to practice with the voting machines if you haven't voted on them yet. They're still pretty new. We just started using them last year. So please take the opportunity to stop by and check it out and feed in the sheets of paper. And Lynn has a comment to make.
I just want to interject. For those of us who aren't used to using this thermal paper yet, that we be mindful of how temperamental the paper is. So you don't want to have wet hands. Although we're still practicing our COVID protocols, we want to make sure that our hands are dry, that we don't have sanitizer on them, that we don't crinkle up or fold the paper, because you'll get it when you check in and then you walk over to the machine. And if you're like me, I'm just going to hold on and put it wherever, stuff it in my purse, don't do that. Because you want the paper to be able to be fed into the machine, and if it wrinkles, it won't be able to read it. You'll have to get another sheet of paper. So we just want you to be mindful of the fact that this paper is temperamental. Yes?
Thank you, Lynn. I have a question.
Sure.
So if we're getting these sheets as we enter and go to our voting booth, is there a place where we can place it safely so that it doesn't wrinkle?
So you can set it on the side. So when you go into your booth, there are these privacy banners, is that a word? Privacy screens. If you want to kind of set it there or set it across the top of the top of the machine where you would feed the other sheet in, you can set it there as well. But you want to make sure you set it someplace where it won't be damaged, won't be wet, won't get crinkled or wrinkled in any way. So you want to do that. But please be mindful of how you handle the paper, because the paper itself is a very vital part of the process.
Thank you, Lynn. That was a really good point. All right, so next, we have lots of important dates quickly approaching. So we just passed our National Voter Registration Day, in which we registered over 1,500 voters in Harris County. So that was a really exciting day. Our teams are constantly hard at work, making sure we're able to touch each communities and give folks the time and the resources needed to make sure they're making informed decisions and they know where to go to register to vote, because a lot of people don't know that. So we're bringing it to people to make that process more convenient and more fun too. So the last day to register to vote is October 11th. That is quickly approaching. And if you are a VDVR, the last day you have to turn in those applications given to you by October 11th is the very next day, October 12th, okay? So make sure you're very cognizant of those dates, because if you don't turn them in by the 12th, folks will not be registered in time for this upcoming election. And the first day of early voting? Oh, sorry, yes, ma'am. If you're a VDVR, a volunteer deputy voter registrar, so that means you register folks to vote, the last day you have to turn in completed voter registration applications is October 12th. Okay, yeah, thank you for your question. October 24th is the first day of early voting, so that's really exciting. Lynn's very excited about it. I always early vote. And so the next date is October 28th, which is going to be the deadline for mail ballot applications. And then on November 3rd, we have the late night voting. So instead of our polls being open just 7 to 7, we have them open until 10 p.m. on November 3rd, which is also a Texans home game. Yes.
Is there any advantage to voting early over waiting for regular voting?
You know, the lines are usually smaller for early voting. Although there are fewer locations, you know, some folks just find it very exciting to vote on election day. It's a tradition. But we have a good 2 solid weeks to early vote. So I would definitely take advantage of that, because, it's just, you got more time to plan it out too. And that's also another important step, is to make sure you're making a plan to vote, where, the time, and how you're gonna get there and things like that. Yes, sir.
Second half is, how many early voting locations are there in Harris County?
We have 99 early voting locations. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We've increased it because we've realized, lots of folks like to vote early, including myself. Do you have a question? Do you like to vote early?
Okay, so we're going to go ahead. Are you okay with people interjecting questions?
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm going to be Vanna and run around with this so that we can get the questions on the video.
No questions, they're answering everything.
Oh, yay!
We're just having a good time. All right, so November 4th is going to be our last day to early vote. Polls, again, are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So if you're going to vote on your way home or maybe even before work, you have those opportunities. So just make sure you make that plan. Check out harrisvotes.com to see where your nearest polling location is on your route or, near your home. And then, big exciting fireworks, November 8th is Election Day. Yes. Oops, I just hit the mic.
I vote anywhere during early vote and on election day.
Yes, you can. That is a change that was made pretty recently. You can vote anywhere in Harris County if you are a registered voter in Harris County. All right, and so the last slide I'm going to read is pertaining to registered voters. As of September 12th, there is an astounding 2,548,000 577 registered voters in Harris County, and we have the population equivalent to the state of Kentucky, the entire state, or 3 times the size of good old Maine, which I find very interesting. So that lets you know just how big of a lift elections are in Harris County and why it's super important for us to get out and talk to as many people as we can to make sure they know what's available to them. And does anybody have any further questions for me or any of the content that I've just covered? Yes. Oh, microphone.
Her question was, could you vote at any poll during early voting as well as the election?
Election day.
So you're not restricted
To your voting precinct. That is correct. Yeah, you can vote anywhere. Yeah, it's news. It's good news.
Well, we have the technology, so there's really no reason not to make that available. I actually did have one more question. So let's say I'm an idiot and I forgot those notes that I made, and but that sample ballot is posted at the polling location. So can I take a pen and paper out of my car and make notes before I go into the polling location?
So, yes, you can. But if you're going to be voting outside of your voting precinct, something that might be the issue is like that sample ballot might not match your specific voting precinct. So I would definitely try, I mean, as best as I can, like the statewide, countywide things are going to be on everybody's ballot, but those municipal things are not going to be on, the same things won't be on everybody's ballot.
Can I ask just a whiny baby question?
Of course.
Is there a reason that, at least in the part of town where I live, all of the polling locations changed for the primaries? And then when I finally found a new place to go, it was at a school that had not done this before, and I kept getting stopped by staff members of the school because I didn't have a school visitor badge. So I couldn't get to where I needed to vote other than I was very determined, and I eventually got there, but it was very difficult. So 2 parts. All of the polling locations changed from where I've gone for 15 years, and then the new place was a school that didn't know how to deal with it.
I'm going to let Lynn take that question because they were doing some polling location research recently in recruitment.
So to piggyback on that, or to answer that directly, that's a party thing. So the locations are reflections of what the parties choose, and then they get voted on or approved. So if all the parties agreed upon those locations, then they pass. But in terms of why they changed, maybe sometimes people just change, they don't want to be involved, they don't want to do it anymore, maybe it causes too much traffic. Whatever the reason could be, the entities get to choose why or if they do not participate. However, those who are selected and chosen, they're suggested by the parties, so both parties come to the table with these are our suggested locations, and then they have to vote and agree upon those locations. And so if they didn't make it, they clearly didn't agree upon. I don't know how or why, but that's how they didn't happen. Now, the situation with the schools should not have been as challenging as it sounds like you have faced, and it just sounds like they didn't know how to maybe route voters one way versus voting parents and kids the other. If you want to give me that location, I can take it back to our offices to make sure that we can work with them to set that up and make it not as much of a challenge, because that creates another set of issues that the school probably doesn't realize, because they're trying to keep the kids safe, which is what we all want, right? But we don't want them to also stop people from voting in the process of doing that. So maybe we can work with them and help them figure out a way to get that done. If you're able to share that with me afterwards, I'll gladly get that information from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that Resurrection is a location to vote on election.
Yay! Resurrection is an election day polling location, so for all of you that live in the area or worship here, feel free to come and support your church as a polling location.
And I also happen to know that we're probably going to be an early vote location again this year, maybe. So, right, but no, this is, I think that another location fell out, and this happens, stuff happens. Places have plumbing issues, or for whatever reason, they're not able to do it this election. And so I know that the church was contacted about being early vote location. So fingers crossed, we can just vote at church on Sunday.
So to piggyback on that, polling locations change throughout the whole process just because there's a set criteria that they have to meet, and sometimes they're willing to do the work to get there, or they don't want to do it, and whatever it is, it happens, it changes up until Election Day. So that could very well be possible. Keep your eyes and ears posted to see if that is something that happens. Yes?
I know I can probably find it online, but is early voting, are we able to vote on Saturday?
So there is a Saturday in there for early voting.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So we'll go to the next slide. The next slide is the controversial slide. So as we all know, the Texas legislature meets, right, and they change laws and things that happen and bring all that good stuff to the table. Something that we saw that changed is how we apply for mail ballot applications. With that, the process has changed, and that you have to complete the form. That part itself is not new. What the form now requires of you is different, though. It's asking for either the last 4 digits of your social or whatever number on your identification that you use to register to vote. So that could be your driver's license, a Texas state ID, or an election certificate if you have that. And if you don't remember what that number is, that tends to cause an issue. So what we saw last March 1, what we saw in the primary was a lot of kickback, a lot of people being rejected from the process being delayed, taking more time for people, and it being much more of a challenge than we had ever seen it historically. We saw a significant amount of ballot rejections, so much so that it kind of raised an alarm and a flag for a lot of people. That being the case, as we've gone through the process and gone through more elections, we've actually seen it decrease significantly. Also, what we've seen so far, I think we're at like maybe 0.8% projections so far for this election. When I spoke with someone last night, that's what they shared. So we've been working around this education process, so it's working. And I said all that to say, we want you to avoid delays. So if you work with seniors in the church and you're helping them, or if you work with seniors in your neighborhood, your community, in your family, whatever that is, who you might work with to help them with this process, we're encouraging everyone to give us both sets of information. If you give us both sets, it reduces the likelihood of you being rejected, because we'll have either set there. So it won't be, oh, you didn't put this one, we have to send it back because now you have to send it and put this one. If it's all there, it's like, it's not this one, we'll automatically just go to look for the next one. And that way, it reduces the likelihood of you doing that. And then we can get your ballot to you sooner, and then you can get it back to us sooner, and everything is all said and done. I like to encourage everyone to do everything early. I say that because should you run into an issue like some people did with this ballot, it gives you more time to fix it versus if you waited to the deadline. The deadline for vote by mail application is October 28th. So if you waited to the 28th and got it back to us where it got back in the office, you wouldn't have any time to fix it and correct. You would have missed the deadline. But if you do it now, or if you did it last week, we can reach back out to you and say, hey, we need you to fix this. And then they can get back to us, and you're still within that window, and you still can get it done. So if this is something that you're doing on your own, working in a church, working with whatever community groups that you're working with seniors to help them do this, they meet the criteria, I suggest that you encourage them to do it early. Next slide. Again, to avoid delays. So the first slide was a picture of the application to vote by mail. This one is the actual ballot, because that has to be sent back with the similar identifying information. So again, we saw delays for people because they didn't give us all of the information that we needed. But again, we're going to ask that you give us both sets of information so that we can make sure we can accept your ballot when it gets in. And again, if you do it early and we get it back early, we can get back to you early and give you time to correct it. But if you wait till the last minute, there's no time. So again, we're asking that you give us your identification number, if that's on your driver's license, your state ID, your election identification certificate, or any of the other allowable options, the last 4 of your social. If you give us both, that helps us process your application a lot sooner. But what you also want to make sure is that you sign it. A lot of people were missing the signature. The process is somewhat different now. It's asking for there's a privacy envelope, you have to sign it in a certain place, and a lot of seniors were missing that place where the signature goes because it's a new part of the process. They're used to doing it a certain way. And I'm saying seniors, it's not just seniors. Anyone who is eligible to vote by mail, so forgive me for overgeneralizing. But for those who were doing it and returning it back to us, they were missing this step because it was different and they didn't realize that the law, this isn't just a process or a procedure that we implemented, this is the law, and we have to follow it in this way that the Texas legislature requires. So we want to make sure that they list the last four of their social, their identifying number from their Texas driver's license, their state ID, or election identification certificate, whichever one applies, and sign it as required where the privacy envelope is. We want to make sure that they do all of that. And we'll also send, it'll be a slip of paper with it that will kind of guide you and walk you through it to show you where you need to go and what you need to mark. So we're hoping that people will catch on to that and see that as well. Next slide. So, oh, yes, question.
Yes, I know several people that had a mail-in ballot, and they decided to vote in person, but they did not bring their mail-in ballot with them. Could you describe the procedure they need to follow?
So a lot of people may request to vote by mail, receive the ballot, and then get to election day and decide that they don't want to do it. For whatever reason, they can. You're definitely well within your rights to do that. What we ask, though, is that if you're doing that, that you bring the ballot with you to the polling location. That way we can cancel it out. So what happens is this: when you show up to the polls and you request to vote in person, we look you up in the system and we see that you requested a ballot by mail. So when we do that, we allow you to vote provisionally in person if we do not receive the ballot back. Here's why. No one gets to vote twice, right? So we have to make sure that you only vote once and that you haven't sent the other ballot back and it wasn't a miss it in the mail type situation. So after Election Day has passed, we get 10 days to cure ballots and to make sure all the numbers are accurate and make sure everything is legitimate. In that time, we're qualifying and making sure that this person only voted once, that they submitted this application by mail, but the application by mail wasn't returned and they voted in person. We have a checks and balances process for everything. So that way we make sure that you only vote once, but we do that. Thank you, sure. We do that and it's just part of the process of making sure we have our checks and balances in place and that everyone only votes once and that all rules are followed and no one goes against the system and that we don't miss anything. You still are allowed to vote in person, you definitely will. However, it's considered a provisional ballot at that time until we can get to the end of the process and check your voter registration and the vote by mail stuff versus the vote in person stuff. That's it, yes.
And what if I forgot to mail it in, and I also have some mobility issues on when I go to the polling location?
I'm sorry, say it again. You have...
Okay, so what if I forget to mail it in, and I take it to the polling location, but I have some mobility issues, and I can't really walk in or stand in line to vote? What are the alternatives?
So I guess you're moving towards the ADA compliance.
Are you going to talk about curbside voting?
I'm going to touch on
awesome.
ADA stuff. You want me to do it when I get there, or you want me to answer the question? Okay. Okay. We're still on polling location, so but I am going to address ADA stuff. So next slide is our polling locations, times, dates. So some things have slightly changed. You mentioned polling locations changing. Because of the amount of people we expect in this particular election, and because it's going to be such a large election, right, and there's so much energy around it, we're moving all of our operations to NRG. That's just how big it'll be. That'll be our early voting location as well, and it'll be an election day location. A lot of people may come in and want to drop their ballot in person off, and usually when they do it, they can go to our main offices, which are on Preston Street. This time you won't be able to do that because no one will be there. We'll all be at NRG, so we're moving that to the ballot location for Election Day, as well as it'll be an early voting location, as well as an Election Day location, which is really cool for us. I don't know if any of you have ever worked a campaign or worked on Election Day, or like if you worked a polling location. It's actually hard to get out to go vote when you're working the election. So it'll be cool that we'll actually get to vote, and I believe you said it's a game day. For late night voting night, it's actually a Texans game day. So let's hope the earlier part of the night, right before people get to drinking and being excited, that they come vote first before they go enjoy the game. I hope that'll help with turnout as well. It'll be pretty cool to see that. And then as you see, we have locations for early voting as well as election day all over the county. So you can go and vote wherever is closest to you. Maybe you were out working, maybe you were out running errands or whatever it is, and you can say, oh, I have some time in between my next appointment now. You can pull it up on your phone. It's not an app, it's just a website, but you go onto harrisvotes.com, you pull it up, the voting locations, and it'll tell you what the closest location to you is, as well as what the wait time is. So you'll make the most of your time, and that's a pretty cool option. So we have 99 locations for early voting, and we'll have more than 780 locations on actual election day. So you should be able to not drive more than 2 to 3 blocks without hitting a polling location, and that'll be cool. Ideally, if you go to an early vote, because I like everything early, you won't have the lines that you'll have on election day, because some people just like to do, for tradition, they wait till election day. But NRG will be a early voting location as well as an election day location, so that'll be different this year. And the next slide, please. So this will speak to what you were mentioning. At the polling location, so we do a lot of accommodations. If you're working with someone, again, if you're working with a senior, elderly, someone who has limited mobility, maybe they have they just can't stand in lines long, they can't take that physical toll, whatever that might be, we can accommodate them in a number of ways. One way is we offer curbside voting. Specifically what that means is that you'll pull up to the voting location, there'll be a buzzer that looks like this picture outside of that location, you'll ring that buzzer, someone will come out and they'll acknowledge you. You'll still wait in line, but you'll do it from your car. They'll bring out a voting machine to your car. And when they bring that out to the car, that person can vote from the car. They do not have to come inside to cast their vote. They can vote from the car. Now, I want us to understand that this is not the same thing as drive-through voting. Drive-through voting that we saw that last in 2020 or early 2021 was the last time we had it. We saw that then it was actually a really good resource. You can just pack up the car with you and everybody. Maybe you had kids that you had to take to daycare, or you just picked them up and you wanted to stop through on your way back to the house. You could still do drive-through voting, then everyone in the car could vote. Curbside voting is not that. Curbside voting is an accommodation for someone with a physical mobility limitation or a disability of some sort, and that's only for that person. Everyone in the car who does not qualify cannot use it. They will not ask you to prove it, but you still are not eligible, and do not exploit the system, please. But it's an accommodation for someone who may need that. The next slide, please. And so with the next slide, we also offer these accommodations. So if you choose to use the demo that we have out here, you'll see that there's a device that's attached to it that looks like this bottom picture. That picture is I don't know how to describe it, but it's a device that has a wheel and a couple of slides on it. And if you need to listen to the ballot, or if you need to read the ballot larger or something like that, you need to hear it, you would use this accommodation to do so. Now, why someone might need to hear it, maybe they have a cognitive delay. Sometimes someone could suffer a stroke and maybe they don't process things the same reading them as they do as hearing them. If they need to use that, they can. Maybe someone can't read for whatever reason. They can use that to listen to it. They would have to use the wheel, though. You no longer use the screen because it's all touch screen, right? But once you use this wheel and device, you no longer use the screen. You do that. Also, you can enlarge the font on the screen if you need to, and you can use that as well. I'm trying to make sure. We offer video remote interpreting, so if someone needs to use sign language or something like that, ideally you can schedule these things prior to getting to the polls, but it's not required. But you can schedule it. Even the curbside voting, if you're going to vote curbside someplace, you can call ahead and say, I need to make accommodations to use X, Y, and Z service at such and such location at such and such time, and they can have someone available for you. But it's not required. Please do not let that hinder you in terms of showing up to a location to get the services. You may have to wait a little while because they may have a person going from location to location. However, you will be eligible still to use it whichever one you show up at. we have to accommodate you. Please make sure that you know that and that you share that with your loved ones and friends and family. I'm trying to think. That's it. We can go to the next slide. So for assistance, say you take someone with you and maybe they can't do it on their own. They usually use an interpreter of someone, or they take someone with them for whatever reason that, to help them with their different ability in terms of how they do things. You can let the judge there know, and they have to complete an oath. They have to sign it to say that they aren't forcing you to do it a certain way, that they aren't an agent of an employer or a candidate of some sort, but you can do that. And again, that's if you need assistance reading the screen, are comfortable with another language, although we do offer English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese languages. Legally, we have to offer those 4 languages because of the size of the population that we have, but maybe you speak a language other than that, and you need someone else to help you with the translations. That's perfectly fine. You can bring someone with you. It's just that they have to sign these formal documents to say that they are an assistant, they aren't being paid, they aren't doing, anything that's malicious. They're there to help you with that. And that's well within your right to do it. We may have someone there that can assist, but if you have someone that works with you, I know a lot of times we've seen grandparents lean on grandchildren or children to help them with those type of accommodations, and they can gladly bring that person with them as long as they're an adult and have them come and assist in that way. And so we're at pretty much the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned a smidge ago, we have language accommodations for certain languages just because of the size of the population in Harris County. So if you or someone want to work with our office or have some questions for anything about our office, they can call into either of these numbers. So for the general line, it's 755-6965. For Spanish, it's 274-8201. Vietnamese, it's 713-274-8202. Chinese is 713-274-8202. If you would like to, if you have your phone, you can pull your phone out and scan this QR code, and in doing so, you'll be able to sign up for our list for our emails about what we have going on. What we also offer is that we have, for each of these communities, we have monthly meetings leading up to each election, and we address them in these meetings. So we also have what's not listed as African American Outreach Community Meeting as well to address those voting needs, but it's English, right? But you can sign up, you can go here and sign up for our general community meeting, and then we can go from there and get you into the other ones. If you were to log on to our website, harrisvotes.com, you'll get a plethora of information about all you need to know with immediate urgency about voting, elections, locations, checking your voter registration status. I'm trying to think what else is there. Your sample ballot. I want to stress the importance of printing out your sample ballot prior to the election, because this will be a long ballot. When I say it's long, I'm not exaggerating. Bria was not exaggerating. It's a long ballot, y'all. We're going to print out our sample ballots prior to heading and make all of our selections beforehand, because standing there is long. It's a long time. It's long. So if you make your selections in advance, you can copy them from your paper and get them right off the screen and move the process along. A little quicker. That's legal. You cannot do it with a phone or electronic device, but you can do it with paper. So again, if you know seniors that you're encouraging to do that, make sure you remind them it has to be paper, not an iPad or anything. And again, I was getting into our community meetings. These are our community coordinators that we address all of our different groups. In addition to the language and cultural needs, we also have other groups. So we do rural outlier areas, veteran voters, LGBTQIA+, as well as restoring voices for those who have completed felonies and are no longer on paper and want to get back to their rights. If you are working with any groups who might be interested in any of these other meetings that we have, send them our way. Send them our way. We want to work with everybody and make sure that they're in the process. Yes?
As you can see, I have an arm and a sling.
Okay.
And it'll probably still be there by the time election comes.
Mm-hmm.
How do I feed, it said it takes 2 hands to feed the paper in, but I ask someone.
You can ask one of the election workers to help you. You may be able to do it with one. We suggest 2 because the way it has guides on it and you can put it in. But if you're kind of tech savvy and you're used to doing stuff with technology, you probably will be able to navigate it with one. But for someone who may not be used to using tech and may not be comfortable with using it, they likely will need to. We can practice out here if you like when we're done, and you can see for yourself. But that concludes my presentation. I'll take questions. Yes.
The ballot drop-off boxes, how can I find out where it's dropped off?
So, and its locations of drop-off too, right? I don't want to tell you that for sure. On harrisvotes.com,
It'll tell me.
yes, it'll tell you. Definitely election day. Definitely election day is NRG. Say it again.
I said, no, it wasn't dropped.
I get it.
Either,
I
but-
get it.
I wanted to ask, would it be breaking the law, let's say, if somebody does need help feeding it in? Would the voter be breaking the law, or the clerk, if they ask a clerk, hi, could you come over and help me feed this in?
No, not if you're asking a clerk, but ask a clerk. Ask someone who works there to help you. Do not ask another person or another voter. Ask a clerk. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob Stubblefield, Justice Ministry, Harris County Elections Administration, for supporting us in this endeavor. We now have concluded this portion of voting 411. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Next, if people want some time practicing on the machines, you can do a practice vote here. People that are online, or if you're watching this on YouTube later, there is a video that has been created by the Elections Department. You can find that on harrisvotes.com, but we will also be attaching it to this video.